The dropship bucked violently as it punched through the turbulent atmosphere of Zephyros 9. Inside the cramped hull, Captain Juno Sable braced against the bulkhead, one hand gripping an overhead rail, the other tapping through a mission briefing on her wrist pad. The words blurred from turbulence, but the summary had already burned into her mind. Mission objective: retrieve the artifact. Do not let the Alari get it first. Simple. If only reality ever cooperated. A disgruntled grunt from the opposite bench made her glance up. Dante Wrench Valero, their resident wildcard, was fiddling with a pocket-sized drone, probably rewiring it to explode, fly faster, or make coffee. His dark, grease-streaked fingers moved with practiced ease. "Think we'll actually make it this time?" Wrench asked, voice half a drawl, half a challenge. Across from him, Dr. Elias Fong, the team's problem solver, barely looked up from his hollow tablet, where glowing symbols danced across the interface. Statistically speaking, not great. That's the spirit. Wrench smirked. Elias sighed, rubbing his temples. 37 teams have failed before us. 37. I don't suppose that inspires anyone else with confidence. History's full of long shots. A new voice chimed in. Echo Vance, the dreamer, her expression full of irrepressible curiosity. She leaned forward, eyes bright. "But that's why we're here, isn't it? We don't do impossible. We do let's see what happens if we try." Juno let the conversation play out, observing rather than interrupting. This was a dynamic. Wrench pushed. Elias calculated. Echo believed. And she? She made sure none of them died before breakfast. A sharp beep signaled their descent into the ruins. The pilot's voice crackled over comms. "Captain, we're 3 clicks from the target. You'll be on foot from here." Juno straightened. "All right, you know the drill. Get in, secure the artifact, get out. If the Alari show up..." "They will show up," Elias muttered. Juno continued, unfazed. "Then we move faster. Questions?" Wrench raised a hand lazily. "Yeah. Do we get a bonus for not dying?" "Your bonus is still breathing," she deadpanned. "Gear up. Landing zone. Zephyros 9. The doors hissed open, spilling the team into the ruins of a once great city. Jagged obsidian spires jutted from the earth like fractured teeth, remnants of a civilization long turned to dust. A bitter wind howled through the skeletal remains of ancient towers, carrying the scent of scorched stone. Overhead, the sky was a bruised mixture of violet and black, a storm brewing on the horizon. Elias adjusted his scanner. The temple complex is northeast. If the artifact is still intact, it's inside. Wrench was already distracted, crouched beside a half-buried alien speeder bike. "Anyone mind if I take souvenirs?" Juno sighed. "Not the time." Echo turned in a slow circle, taking in the towering ruins with open wonder. "Can you feel it? This place used to be incredible. The Zephyri built monuments meant to outlast time itself. They didn't outlast whoever burned this world down," Juno said. Before Echo could reply, the comms unit crackled. A harsh, guttural voice interrupted the static. "Human vessel. Your presence is unauthorized. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." Juno swore. "The Alari Dominion." She tapped her earpiece. "This is Captain Sable of the Curators. We have no quarrel with you. We're here for historical preservation." The Alari commander's reply was laced with amusement. "Preserve whatever you like, after we have claimed what is ours." The transmission cut off. Elias exhaled sharply. "They're close." Juno didn't hesitate. "Move. Now." The race to the temple. The team sprinted through the ruins, navigating crumbling alleyways and collapsed structures. Every step sent dust spiraling into the air, footprints vanishing behind them. A distant roar split the sky, a Alari gunship banking toward their location. "Company incoming!" Wrench shouted. Juno spotted a half-collapsed bridge ahead. "We make it across. We lose them in the temple maze." "Go!" Blaster fire erupted behind them, scorching stone. The Ulari were faster than expected. Aiko was the first of the bridge, but as she sprinted forward, the structure groaned beneath her weight. Crack! The stone beneath her crumbled. Elias lunged, grabbing her wrist just as she pitched forward. "I've got you!" Juno fired back at the pursuing Ulari as Wrench skidded to their side. "A little help here." Wrench didn't hesitate. He pulled a coil of high-tensile wire from his belt, anchored it to a nearby beam, and tossed it toward Elias. "Hook her up." Elias secured the harness. "Aiko, don't." "I know," she said through gritted teeth. "Don't look down." With a sharp jerk, Wrench activated the winch. Aiko swung up and over the chasm, landing in a heap on the other side. "Next time," she gasped, "I choose a path." Juno yanked Elias forward as more blaster fire tore through the air. "Move, move, move." The team bolted into the temple entrance, disappearing into the darkness just as the Ulari gunship blasted the bridge to rubble behind them. The sanctuary of the lost. The moment they were inside, the sound of the Ulari pursuit faded. Juno's flashlight cut through the dust-heavy gloom. The temple walls, smooth and adorned with unfamiliar symbols, pulsed faintly with residual energy. Aiko, still catching her breath, placed a hand against the stone. "It's warm." Elias knelt, scanning the floor. "These markings, they predate known Zephyr script. This place is older than we thought. Can we have history class after we make sure we're not about to be vaporized?" Wrench asked. Juno checked her weapon. "Agreed." "Elias, where's the artifact?" Elias turned slowly, eyes narrowing at a massive doorway ahead. Symbols above it glowed faintly as he approached. "There," he whispered. Beyond that threshold lay the wisdom of the ancients. And outside, the Ulari were regrouping. Aiko ignored him, stepping forward with reverence. "No, a test of understanding. The Zephyr were philosophers, not just engineers. Their greatest treasures were locked behind wisdom, not brute force." Juno tightened her grip on her rifle. "That's poetic, but we don't have time for riddles. The Ulari are regrouping, and I'd rather not be here when they come knocking." A distant boom echoed through the temple corridors, followed by the unmistakable whine of Ulari plasma cutters beginning their work on the sealed entrance. "Great," Wrench muttered. "We're on a clock." The first trial. Elias's scanner chimed, pulling his attention back to the door. "There's a sequence here, a language almost mathematical. If I can align these symbols in the right order." He reached out and pressed a sequence of glyphs. The door shuddered but did not open. Instead, the floor beneath them shifted, revealing razor-thin energy beams slicing upward from the stone. Wrench yelped as he jumped back, barely avoiding being bisected. Juno cursed. "Tell me that was supposed to happen." Elias's expression darkened. "I may have miscalculated." Wrench exhaled sharply, eyeing the lethal beams. "Right. So wisdom, not brute force. Maybe let the historian have a crack at it." Aiko stepped closer, eyes scanning the glowing glyphs. The Zephyr believed in duality, balance. Each choice had an equal and opposite reaction. She reached out and pressed a different set of symbols. The energy beams dimmed, but now a section of the ceiling began to descend toward them. Elias paled. "You just triggered a different mechanism." Aiko gritted her teeth. "It's part of the test." Thinking quickly, she pressed a third sequence, one that mirrored the first. The ceiling halted. The floor stabilized, and with a deep rumbling groan, the massive door split open. Beyond it, darkness yawned. Wrench let out a nervous laugh. "Okay, remind me never to let Elias pick the buttons again." Juno wasn't laughing. She was listening. Behind them, the plasma cutters had stopped. The Ulari weren't cutting through anymore. They were inside the temple, the shadow in the halls. Juno motioned for silence. The team slipped through the now open threshold, sealing it behind them just as distant. Heavy footsteps echoed through the temple's stone corridors. "Damn it," Elias whispered. They found another entrance. Juno kept her rifle raised. "We keep moving." The passage ahead twisted in impossible ways. Walls folding into each other, gravity shifting in subtle increments. The Zephyr had designed this place to repel intruders. Unfortunately, that now included them. Eiko trailed a hand along the wall. "This architecture, it's like the temple is alive." "Let's hope it doesn't take that personally," Wrench muttered. A sudden metallic clang rang out, making them all freeze. From the corridor behind them, something heavy was moving fast. Juno barely had time to turn before a hulking, cybernetic figure emerged from the shadows, an Ulari shock trooper. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, its armor a seamless fusion of organic muscle and brutal machine plating. Its single, glowing red eye fixed on them with a predator's focus. Elias paled. "That's a Dominion executor." Juno raised her rifle, already knowing it wouldn't help. "That's a problem." The executor charged. The deadly chase. The team scattered as a massive Ulari tore through the corridor, swiping at them with a plasma-clad gauntlet. The sheer force of the swing shattered the stone pillar behind them. Wrench grabbed Elias by the collar and yanked him backward, just as the executor's strike missed him by inches. "You want to die analyzing that thing, or do you want to run?" The answer was obvious. Juno took point, leading them deeper into the temple's labyrinthine tunnels. The executor gave chase, its heavy footfalls shaking the floor beneath them. "This thing is fast." Eiko gasped. Juno glanced at Elias. "Any brilliant ideas?" Elias, panting, pulled up his scanner. "These tunnels are shifting. The temple is still reacting to our presence." Wrench shot him a glare. "Oh, great. We're in an ancient funhouse of death." A new sound joined the chaos, a low mechanical whine, building in intensity. The executor was charging its plasma weapon. Juno saw it coming and shoved Eiko aside, just as a searing blue beam scorched through the space she had occupied a second earlier. "No more running," Juno growled. "We take it down." Wrench threw his hands up. "With what harsh language?" Juno's eyes flicked to the walls, lined with Zephyr statues holding orbs of energy, ancient power sources, possibly still active. "Wrench, how fast can you rig an explosive?" Wrench followed her gaze, grinned, and pulled 2 small demolition charges from his belt. "You just made my day, Cap." Elias and Eiko worked quickly to reroute the statue's latent energy toward a central point. As the executor stormed closer, Wrench slapped the explosives onto a power conduit and primed the trigger. "Ready?" Juno asked. Wrench grinned. "Not in the slightest." Juno fired a single shot, not at the Ulari, but at the support structure above it. The ceiling collapsed, forcing the executor to halt, just as Wrench detonated the charges. A wave of crackling energy surged outward, engulfing the massive soldier. The executor let out a guttural, metallic roar before its systems overloaded, sending it crashing to the floor in a smoldering heap. Silence fell. Wrench let out a low whistle. Well, that was dramatic. Eiko, still catching her breath, peered at the now motionless executor. "Do you think it's dead?" The red eye flickered. Juno grabbed Wrench by the collar. "Run deeper into the unknown." The team bolted, leaving the twitching machine behind. They burst into a vast, open chamber. Before them, suspended in a gravity-defying column of shimmering light, was their objective, the artifact. It was beautiful, a crystalline structure pulsing with golden energy, radiating something ancient, something watching. Elias stared breathless. The wisdom of the ancients. Juno's gut told her this wasn't over. Eiko took a step forward, drawn to the artifact like a moth to flame. "We finally found it." A deep, resonant hum filled the air. The chamber reacted, and from the darkness beyond, something else stirred. "I think we've triggered something," Elias said quietly, his voice vibrating with both fear and fascination. I don't think it's us, Juno muttered. She reached for her rifle. This place doesn't feel right. A pulse of energy radiated from the artifact, rippling through the room, and then silence. Eiko reached out, her fingertips grazing the glowing surface of the crystal. The moment she made contact, the column of light flared to life. The floor beneath their feet trembled. The walls began to shift, moving, warping. The ancient technology had awakened. Juno snapped into action. Eiko, get away from it. But Eiko was frozen, her hand still pressed against the artifact, as if the crystal had connected with something deeper inside her. Eiko! Elias shouted, but it was too late. With a violent crack, the air shattered, a burst of energy that sent all of them reeling backward. The light around the artifact swelled, forming an impossible spiral of energy. The stone walls of the chamber began to collapse inward, as though the very fabric of the temple was trying to consume them. Move! Juno shouted, but the force of the energy sent her flying. Everything turned to chaos. Elias managed to grab onto a column, his feet sliding across the crumbling floor, but he wasn't fast enough. A jagged piece of the ceiling broke loose and crashed down toward him. Elias! Eiko screamed. Juno hurled herself toward him, tackling him out of the way just as a massive stone shattered the ground where he had been standing. They tumbled across the floor, gasping for air. Wrench cursed and rolled to his feet, taking aim at the artifact with his blaster. We need to destroy it before it tears the whole damn place apart. No! Elias snapped, his voice urgent as he scrambled to his feet. If we destroy it, we might never understand what it is. This could be the key to everything. Juno's head throbbed as she tried to process the situation. The artifact was clearly alive, and it was reacting to their presence. But how? And why did it seem to be targeting Eiko? The hum grew deeper, darker. Juno could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest, like 1,000 eyes watching, waiting. The artifact was calling to something. It's not safe. Wrench shouted. We need to leave. Now. Eiko, still staring at the crystal, seemed unaware of the imminent danger. Her body was trembling, and her voice was soft, almost trance-like. It's so beautiful. Juno exchanged a quick look with Elias. He was just as alarmed, but he didn't seem willing to give up on the artifact without a fight. We have to get out, Juno insisted. But before she could move, a shadow shifted in the corner of her vision. From the darkness beyond the chamber, something huge and alien stirred. The Ulari executor, the one they'd thought was defeated, rose to its feet, a crackling red glow emanating from its shattered systems. It wasn't dead. It was recharging. Juno's stomach sank. We're not alone, she muttered. The executor's glowing red. I snapped toward them. It was different now, something darker in its programming. It was driven by a singular purpose: destroy the humans. Eiko's eyes snapped wide open, and for the first time since touching the artifact, she blinked back to reality. Juno, she said, her voice shaking. What's happening? Juno grabbed her by the arm, pulling her toward the exit. Whatever that thing is, it's not our problem anymore. Let's go. But the executor's weapon powered up, and the plasma cannon on its arm began to charge. The whole temple shuddered again. The executor fired, the energy beam blasting toward them with terrifying speed. Juno shoved Eiko aside just as the beam whizzed past them, carving through the stone wall. Wrench! Juno barked as she fired a few return shots at the executor. Cover us! Yeah, I've got your back. But you owe me for this. Wrench responded, pulling a pulse grenade from his pack and hurling it straight at the executor. The grenade exploded with a loud bang, but it barely slowed the hulking machine down. The executor advanced, its powerful limbs crushing everything in its path. We need a plan, Elias said, his voice laced with urgency. We can't fight it head-on. We have to use the environment. Juno's mind raced. She had no choice but to trust Elias's instincts. All right, Lead the way. Elias grabbed Aiko's arm and pulled her toward one of the walls. There's a series of plasma conduits in this area. If we can overload them. Overload! Wrench yelled. Are you out of your mind? We'll blow ourselves up. Better that than being crushed by that thing, Juno said. We'll make it work. The executor let out another mechanical roar, and its cannon charged again. This time, the beam crashed into the floor, sending debris flying. Juno dove toward the nearest conduit. Get ready, she shouted, as Elias began tapping commands into a console built into the wall. The whole room trembled. You're sure this is going to work? Wrench asked, eyeing the executor, who was now moving faster. Elias didn't look up. Positive, the wall rippled as energy surged through the conduits. Elias slapped a button, and a series of explosive charges went off. The plasma conduits erupted in a burst of energy, lighting up the entire chamber. For a moment, everything went white. Then the lights flickered, and the executor slowed, its movements jerky. It's malfunctioning, Elias shouted. Now, while it's vulnerable, Juno didn't need any further encouragement. She rushed forward, her rifle raised, and fired into the executor's exposed core. The explosion was massive. The hulking machine collapsed, its systems failing as it crashed to the ground in a heap of smoldering metal. Juno exhaled sharply, scanning the area for further threats. The temple shuddered again, but now it felt like it was dying. The energy from the artifact began to flicker. We need to get out of here, Juno said, turning toward the team. Now, Aiko, still staring at the artifact, hesitated. But The artifact will still be here when we come back, Juno interrupted. Let's survive first. With one last glance at the crystal, Juno led her team back toward the exit, fighting the temple's collapsing interior and the Ulari forces closing in. But this was far from over. The real mystery was just beginning. Aiko, still visibly shaken, was a few steps behind, her gaze locked on the crystal artifact they had narrowly escaped. She had not spoken much since the explosion, her mind clearly occupied with the events that had just transpired. Wrench was ahead, his wild grin plastered across his face as he careened around corners with reckless abandon. This place is falling apart. Can't you feel the adrenaline, Elias? This is the stuff legends are made of. Elias didn't respond immediately. He was busy scanning his wrist console, trying to decipher some last-minute data. I think I've got it, he murmured. There's something happening to the artifact. It's not just energy, it's a signal. Juno shot him a sharp look. A signal? From what? I don't know yet, Elias replied, his voice grim. But whatever it is, it's trying to reach something or someone. This temple's collapse, it's not random. It's being triggered, almost like the artifact's calling for help. Wrench, still barreling ahead, stopped and turned. So, we're running from a distress signal? That's just what I wanted to hear. Juno ignored him, her mind already racing ahead. The Ulari were closing in. The explosion had given them a small window, but it wouldn't last. If they didn't get to the exfil point soon, they'd be trapped in the heart of a collapsed temple with an alien army at their backs. We need to get to the surface, Juno said, her voice low and steady. Aiko, can you stay with us? Aiko didn't answer immediately. Her face was pale, her hand still trembling as it brushed against the wall, almost as though she was still connected to the artifact in some way. She shook her head, snapping out of her trance. I'm fine. Let's go. They rounded the final corner, and the light from the surface grew brighter. But before they could reach the exit, a sudden screech filled the air. It was a sound like scraping metal, followed by the unmistakable hiss of Ulari plasma cannons charging. Juno's heart skipped a beat. They're here. The door ahead slammed shut just as they reached it, the heavy blast door sealing with a mechanical clang. There was no going through it. We're trapped, Wrench shouted. This is a bit much for a Wednesday, don't you think? Juno scanned the room quickly, her mind assessing the situation. The walls were ancient, their structure crumbling, but there were access tunnels running along the sides of the chamber. If they could make it to one of them, they might find another exit. Elias, any luck with those access routes? He didn't look up from his scanner. I'm trying, but the data scrambled. His eyes flickered toward the door. The Alari are almost here. Suddenly, a soft, rhythmic thrum echoed through the chamber. The floor beneath them shuddered. A deep vibration seemed to pulse from the very core of the temple. The walls quivered, and then the door began to open. Wrench raised an eyebrow. This is a hell of a time for the door to be nice. Aiko's eyes widened. It's not the door. It's the artifact. Juno's stomach dropped. It's opening the way. Aiko nodded, her face conflicted. It's activating something. Something bigger. Whatever the signal was. It's calling to something else. The air grew colder as the door opened wider. A strange, otherworldly light filled the chamber, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch impossibly far. The rhythmic hum turned into a resonant, pulsating frequency. We don't have much time, Juno urged, already moving toward the door. Let's go. Fast. They rushed through the archway and into the darkened corridor beyond, the ground shaking beneath them with every step. The light from the artifact was still shining down on them, and the deeper they went, the more intense the hum became. Juno's pulse quickened. The vibrations in the air seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat, a deep, unsettling connection she couldn't shake. And then, just as they turned a corner, the path ahead opened up into a massive chamber. This was no ordinary room. It was a bridge, a massive alien control room, and it stretched beyond the limits of the temple, out into the vastness of space. Before them was the artifact, now pulsing in the center of the chamber, surrounded by strange, towering structures that seemed to hum with the same energy. But that wasn't the only thing that greeted them. At the far end of the room stood an enormous holographic projection, a towering figure floating above them. The figure was alien, its features shifting in the hologram, but it was clear enough to know it wasn't human. The air grew cold as it spoke in a language none of them recognized, its voice echoing through their minds rather than their ears. The message was clear, though. We are the Curators. You have awakened us. Aiko stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. This isn't just a relic. It's an ancient consciousness. Juno felt a chill settle deep in her bones. This is why the Alari were here, Elias murmured. They were after this. After the power to control the Curators. Wrench raised his hands, a grin on his face despite the gravity of the situation. Well, that makes things much more interesting. Juno didn't smile. What now? The hologram flickered again, and the figure seemed to turn its gaze upon them. You have awoken us, but you are not yet prepared for what lies ahead. The choice is yours, humans. Will you join us, or will you stand against us? The question lingered in the air, the weight of it pressing on them. Aiko's voice was steady but full of wonder. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about becoming something more. Juno turned to her team, each of them caught in their own thoughts, and nodded slowly. We're not here to follow anyone, but if we're going to get out of this, we need to figure out what this thing really wants. And somewhere deep inside, Juno knew they were about to face a choice that would change everything, for humanity, for the Curators, and for the universe itself.